The topic of our presentation today is Grow Your Own, a Beginner's Guide to Vegetable Gardening, Part 1. So now I'd like to introduce our wonderful presenter for today, Fatima Muhammad. Fatima grew up in New York and has been an avid gardener for as long as she can remember. She tends a plot at the organic Chinkapin Community Garden in Alexandria, where she grows vegetables, herbs, houseplants, and native plants inspired by her Caribbean heritage. Her gardening journey has taken her from grapevines in New York to teaching her children to grow vegetables in Georgia to trading hot peppers with her neighbors in Trinidad. And these experiences have all shaped her love of growing food across different climates and cultures. Her garden reflects the flavors and traditions of her Caribbean roots and remains a place of joy, creativity, and connection. And now, as a master gardener, she values the application of science to the practices that she once followed intuitively. She serves on our board for the past 3 years, including 2 years as a director and 1 year as vice president. So, welcome, Fatima. I'll turn it over to you, and we're excited to hear from you and learn from you today.
Good morning, everyone. Caitlin, thank you so much for being my shotgun rider this morning in this process, and Julie also for helping with the questions. I am looking forward to this presentation. I'm always excited about teaching individuals who are new to vegetable gardening. I'm going to go over a 7-step series within part 1 and part 2. Part 1 today will cover the location. The benefit will be the introduction as to what do we get out of gardening, the physical requirements and soil testing, the layout of your garden based on your site selection, and how do you get seeds, plants, equipment, and supplies. One of the benefits of gardening, for me and many others, it's a matter of exercise, relaxation, fresh air, and nutrients. And in this time and costs in the economy, it's also for economical reasons because I get to grow things that may have increased in cost during this time in our country. So it not only promotes better health, but it also, if you think about the physical benefits such as squatting, pushing, and pulling, but it's also beneficial for emotional well-being. Planning and caring for a garden can lift your mood while enhancing the beauty of your community. There are many times I'm in my plot and I lose track of time because it's such a calm environment. I consider it my Zen zone. So when you cultivate your own food, also, you can save money on grocery prices, help reduce landfill waste by minimizing the use of packages that we get with our produce. So imagine the satisfaction of displaying fresh flowers and homegrown vegetables on your countertop. Over the next 90 minutes, I will guide you through step 1 through 4 of the 7-step series here today. The first part of the 2-part program designed to help you be successful as you begin your gardening. Please note that all of the photos in this presentation were taken by me or other master gardeners, my colleagues, or provided from open sources. Step 1, we're going to dive into locations. When we think about Northern Virginia, in some areas it can be very dense and also a lot of vertical structures such as apartments and condos. No matter where you live, no matter what your situation is, there are many ways to start a vegetable garden. You can begin with small containers, repurpose milk jug cartons or buckets, a variety of things that will work. Even the egg cartons, keeping those that you have purchased, you still have remaining after you purchase your eggs. So if you have a balcony or a patio, you can try window boxes or hanging planters. Community garden plots are a great option if you want more space and community support. Even without outdoor space, a sunny windowsill can be enough to grow your vegetables. The key is choosing a location that's convenient and easy to access. So you'll be motivated to take care of your garden regularly. Garden is truly for everyone. You don't need acres and acres of land to start. If you start with small containers, repurposed items, that is a great way if you never gardened before and your space is limited. You can utilize, as I stated, the window seals. I am in a community garden plot where I've been for a number of years. And one of the benefits of being there, it just affords me more space and it's easily located from where I live. I can actually walk there, drive there, garden, and walk back home. And it also gets me out as opposed to just being in without any natural lighting or having the opportunity to speak to others. So choose a location that's easy to reach, where you can have frequent visits, and that will play a key role in your success. All right, site selection. When I talk about convenience, I mean choosing a location you can easily reach. If your garden is too far away, how often will you realistically visit? And will it be worth the effort? For example, my community garden just tells you the benefit of doing that. Also, you need to consider the physical characteristics of the site. Is the area level or is it on a hill or some type of slope? Is it rocky? Is it covered with gravel? All of these conditions affect what you can successfully grow. Sunlight and water access, those are critical too, and they're major factors. Do you have to carry water a long distance or is it readily available? And I'll also talk about water and sunlight later in the presentation and its benefit. Environmental factors also matter, such as wind exposure, how close to the building can influence plant growth, proximity, and if you plant too close to trees, your vegetables will compete with other nutrients and moisture. Another thing to consider is soil drainage. Soil viability and proper drainage are also essential. Consider whether your site receives enough sunlight for the vegetables you want to grow. Different vegetables require different amounts of sunlight, and I'll cover that later on as we move forward. Understanding the importance of the site selection is foundational to the successful garden. As you think about the 7 steps, remember to consider them all together, but not in isolation as separate pieces. And that will help ensure your success. Let's just think about one of the main takeaways from that introductory session about site selection, site location, and the benefit why we would want a vegetable garden. And remember that it's for everyone, regardless of experience or lack there, whether you're a novice, whether you've been doing this for years. You can always start small and find a convenient location based on your living conditions and your ability to donate time to the garden, because if you're going to invest in this, you want to make sure that you are successful. Part 2, I'm going to speak about physical requirements and soil testing. With physical conditions, you can observe your garden, you can observe the soil with your own eyes. You can see, touch, and feel the soil. You can look and see whether runoff is creating a situation where the soil is extremely moist or whether it's extremely dry. You can hold the soil in your hand and determine whether it holds together or it doesn't. So the chemical side of it comes with the soil testing, which tells you how to fine tune fertilization of your garden if, in fact, it is needed. This basically lays the groundwork for everything else. Let's go through the components of a healthy soil. In this section, I'm going to discuss 4 factors that play a role in having a healthy soil: loam, organic matter, air, and water. Loam, I will discuss further on the next slide, but organic matter, adding compost or organic materials improves soil structure. It increases nutrient availability and boosts beneficial microbial activity. When we speak of air with vegetable gardening, we're also talking about soil aeration. It affords healthy soil needs, which include having airspace, and without it, it can limit plant growth and impact how successful you are. Moisture is vital for plant growth, but too much or too little can harm the roots. Research from various extension services state that most vegetable gardens need about 1 to 2 inches of water per week, and watering early in the day helps also prevent disease. So now let's look at loam. It is a combination of clay, sand, and silt particles. The correct or best combination of these particles, it has to have the ability to retain nutrient and moisture. It allows for good drainage and is easy to till. Loam soil is very good for growing various vegetable types. For example, highly sandy soil can be a problem since it does not hold much water and have a few nutrients. I've been successful with having one bed in my plot that has some sand and some pebbles to it. And in that area, I have planted lavender, rosemary, and other crops that need that type of environment where the water isn't sitting, it's a drain off. When there was a heavy rain for a long time here in Northern Virginia, my lavender plant died, and it was beautiful and huge. And I used to take stuff from it and make sashes or just have it in floral arrangement. For example, highly sandy soil can be a problem since it does not hold much water and it has very few nutrients. Heavy clay soil may be too heavy. So if either of these are the case, a solution may be to add organic matter such as compost or animal manure. I tend to use horse manure because that was available to us in the community garden. Others use cover crops or organic mulch materials and work these things in to help amend the soil. And they're all excellent for improving the soil for the growth of vegetable gardens. Friability is basically the ability of the soil to crumble under pressure. It's ideal for gardens because it allows plants such as root vegetables, your sweet potatoes, your beets, your radish, etc., the ability to push soil aside to grow. So think of even your radish and carrots. The one I use is the ball test, where I can simply dig up soil from the area I am considering to plant those vegetables and make a ball with the soil and tap it. If the soil does not break easily, it maintains a structure that is probably not a lot of clay and may not be the best area to plant, or your soil may need to be amended. If it comes apart, then that may be an indication of its friability. One of the solutions to help it come apart is by adding compost. So you'll hear talk of compost and manure a couple of times today. Compaction. We probably all have seen this, whether you're in Virginia, Northern Virginia, or Maryland, or even West Virginia. And we have a couple of West Virginia gardeners on. Compaction is when the soil particles are pressed too tightly together and pore spacing is reduced. Soil components are caused by foot traffic, equipment, or vehicles, and they compress all the soil together when it's wet. Basically, it hardens the soil. It increases the density of the soil and decreases the pore space. Therefore, to decrease the ability of water to infiltrate through the soil. If you can stick a garden fork in the soil and it fails to penetrate 2 inches, your soil is compacted and should be aerated. The second part to this, after the physical, is the chemical part of the process. The purpose of conducting a soil test is to provide an accurate assessment of the soil's fertility to make fertilization recommendation. Soil tests also determine if fertilizer or manure should be applied at all, because not all soils require all chemicals. Soil testing is used to optimize growth production, to protect the environment from contamination by runoff, and to improve the nutritional balance of the growing medium. Here in Northern Virginia, on this slide, there are a variety of places in which you can obtain a soil kit. I've obtained mine from the Farrington Community Center. There are several locations in which you can do the same. And if you're outside of Northern Virginia, you can also research various extension offices in your area to obtain a soil kit. When you collect the soil, you will also follow the directions that are provided on how the soil is to be sent for testing. You will collect soil from different sections in your garden and mix it in the container and mail it to the address on the box. And they always tell us, do not tape the box. So make sure you clearly write your name, your email address, and any information that is required to receive your results. I did my soil test 3 years ago, and the cost then was $10. So even if it's increased, it's still relatively reasonable because it will improve your overall garden experience with the combination of thinking of the physical requirements. VCE and Virginia State University, this is their sample form, what it looks like for doing the soil test. As you can see from the plant code list you will use when completing the form. You also have the opportunity to have additional tests conducted, which you can request for an additional minimum fee. The slide you're looking at right now is the results from my vegetable garden from 2022. So I collected soil from 4 different areas in my garden, and I followed the instructions on the form and I mailed them off. When I received my results, you'll see on here the lab test, which shows the results of the availability of nutrients numerically and, if appropriate, as a rate. The rate may be interpreted as following: L for low, M for medium, H for high, etc. And it may also have a plus or negative sign on the results, which shows also DEF for deficiency or SEFF for sufficient. When soil tests low, plants almost always respond to fertilizer. When soil tests medium, plants sometimes respond to fertilizer, and a moderate amount of fertilizer is typically recommended to maintain fertility. When soil tests high to very high, plants usually do not respond to fertilization. A pH of 6.5 is ideal for vegetables. A pH from 6 to 7 is good, basically within that range. The growth of the vegetables will not be hindered in that range. So anything below 5.5 and above 7.5, soil treatment or modifications are often unnecessary. No soil test is performed for nitrogen because this element is very mobile in the soil for laboratory results to be achieved. Nitrogen fertilization recommendations are based on the type of crops or plants to be grown, the previous crops that were grown in that particular site, and the soil yields potential. This is another reason to have your soil test done every 2 to 3 years. The results are good for that amount of time. And I could almost see that when I rotate my vegetables from season to season, what I'm growing, or if I keep them in the same area. There's so many factors that play a role in what's going to happen in the physical and chemical environment in the soil. It's important that you read the label of the fertilizer to make sure you are only adding to your garden what's needed, because it can have a negative impact on the environment through runoff. And you don't want runoff to enter our lakes and streams, because then you have to think about the impact it's going to have on the living organisms there. Remember, my soil test, if I were to go back a screen, did not recommend that I add potassium or phosphate. Therefore, I probably would not use this example here, but it shows you the 3 different numbers and what those numbers represent. Let's talk about sunlight. Vegetable gardens require sunlight. The type of vegetable garden will dictate the amount of sunlight that's needed for it to grow. Too much sunlight may kill certain plants, or not enough sunlight, plants may not thrive. For example, most of our summer crops require a lot of sunlight, and our spring and fall crops vary. So fall crops less, spring require less, as shown in this slide. And also kind of I've added a couple of vegetables that you may find useful for those respective sunlight times. Plant hardiness. What is plant hardiness? Plant hardiness is a standard by which gardeners can use to determine which plants are most likely to thrive in a particular location. The hardiness zone is a geographical area defined as having certain average minimal temperatures, which is related to the survival of plants. You know, one of the sayings is right plant, right place, and I add right time. For example, hardy plants are those that adapt to cold temperatures. Most of us live in Northern Virginia, it's like 7B or 8A now, due to changes in climate temperature. And 7B have a medium length of growing season, but the zone A is a warmer zone with a longer growing season, which consists of hot summers and mild winters. And all of that may sound familiar to everyone on who's in Northern Virginia, the things that have changed over the last couple of years. When you go to the site, there's a link towards the end of the deck. When you go to the site, you're going to have an opportunity to put in your zip code. When you put in your zip code, it's going to pull that up and display what the zone looks like in your area now. So in preparing for this presentation, of course, I put in my zip code, and now it is showing predominantly an 8A zone, which also could mean a longer garden season. Temperature requirements. It's important to know the soil temperature requirements for the very plants you are growing. For example, right now in Northern Virginia, it's a great time to grow peas and leafy vegetables. Warm soil conditions allow crops are mostly during the summer vegetable season. If you see here, it has the seasons, 50 degrees Fahrenheit above, and I give you some examples there. May try to get into my garden this weekend. Hopefully the snow has melted in the plot and provided some good water into the soil and begin the process of planting my leafy vegetables that I grow this time of year. And then later, when we move into summer, I'll do the vegetables that thrive in a warm environment. Air requirements. Good air circulation around plants ensures that they have carbon dioxide, which is necessary for photosynthesis, to make food, and to breathe. In addition to the other environmental factors include light, temperature, and water. Humidity and nutrition impact the growth of plants. CO2 is not just important to humans, it's also important to living things such as plants. Good air circulation around the plant helps prevent fungal disease and supports strong stems. Wind can aid in the air movement, but excessive air can damage plants or dry out the soil. Spacing between plants ensures adequate airflow, and it also reduces the risk of disease, which also allow plants to access oxygen, water, and nutrients. Overcrowding leads to poor circulation and increases competition for resources. If you go back to what I said in the beginning, if you're planting vegetables too close to trees and shrubs, they're competing for these type of resources. So that's a reason why you want to keep enough space for the air to flow through. And if you're planting vegetables that are susceptible to certain type of disease, if you're planting them closely and tight together and then have other plants around them, you may see a bug one day that isn't beneficial, and you kind of pick it off. A couple of days pass and they may take over that entire crop. And this can be one of the reasons why, due to poor air circulation. Water requirements in vegetable garden, 1 to 1.5, 2 inches of water is typically the measurement of water that you would want in a week. Additional watering, such as irrigation, rain barrel, or hoses. When you're watering your garden, you should remember to water the soil as opposed to just taking your hose and spraying. The water needs to get to the roots of the plant so they can take in that nutrient. There's also a recommendation that watering earlier in the morning as opposed to the hot heat time in Northern Virginia. It can cause harm to the plant, but early morning, it most likely can take in the water easier than if you water later in the evening. Soil preparation. Remember to review your amendment recommendations from your soil test and allow it to guide what you add to your garden. For new gardeners, you should remove rubbish and pre-existing plants and amend them only as needed. You may also need to purchase some topsoil to help provide more soil in that area that may have just left just due to nature over time. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the compost. You have to remember your greens and yellows, which I'll go into on this slide, meaning having shredded paper, newspaper boxes, and also your greens, like the scraping of your food to add to the compost. I have used horse manure in the past, which I find valuable for my garden because it helps build rich, living soil and that supports sound, resilient plants. The benefit doesn't come so much from the manure, it comes more so from three things: adding organic matter, feeding soil microbials, and providing a balanced nutrient. So the foundation of all of this, much like in Alexandria soil, it helps loosen heavy clay and helps sandy soil hold more moisture. This will help improve the root growth, aeration, and the water infiltration. Remember, I talked about having the ability for the plant to do all of those things. The feeding of soil microbials that support plant manure is full of particularly digestive plant fibers. Soil organisms break down these daily, slowly. They create humus, release nutrients. This steady nutrient release is gentle than synthesized fertilizers, and it balances the nutrient. So it contains modest amounts of nitrogen and phosphate and potassium, but not in concentrations that would burn your plants. That's what I use. I know a couple of fellow gardeners in my community garden. They tend to use other things, just such as covering, or what I spoke of earlier, the compost, or they also may use wheat crops to cover. I just found that very hard to manage. So I tried it once and I will never try it again. So it's a personal preference about what you want to use. And as you learn your plot or your beds or whatever you're using, wherever you're growing your vegetables, you need to find what's suitable for you based on the multiple factors. Compost consists of the proper balance of the greens, like I said, which are the materials such as the things that come off your table. One thing I will tell you, do not put in compost. That's fish, meat, or dairy products. None of the fatty foods, such as the grease runoff from something you may have cooked, please do not put those in your compost or any community compost. Let's talk about a couple of takeaways from here. This particular section from step 2. Remember, it's important to look at your soil, feel your soil, look up and determine where the sun is angled based on the area you selected for growing your vegetables, and just gain an introductory understanding of air, temperature, sun, and water as you prepare to have fun. All right, so I think this is a great juncture to pause. So, Caitlin, do we have any
Yes,
questions?
we do have one question. Renell was wondering if she or he should be concerned with soil testing if it's going to be a raised bed garden. I'm not sure if this would be purchased potting soil or maybe a combination, some homegrown mix, but if you could just talk about whether soil testing could be beneficial if it's raised beds.
I have raised beds and I do soil testing. So it was very beneficial to me, as you saw the feedback that I received from Virginia Tech.
Elisa was wondering if you could expand on the use of leftover food items in the garden as compost and not grease. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
The decomposition of the food, the grease will add more harm than the breakdown of the food. I don't fry food, so I don't have this problem. I have a green container that I sit on my countertop. It's very indistinct. It doesn't take away from the aesthetics of my kitchen. And I drop in my bananas, if I'm peeling something, some vegetable, or the bud of a squash and other things into that container to collect the greens. I recycle paper, or if I receive something in the mail, it's a box, then I keep those things to contribute to a compost area in our community. And because I contribute to that compost area, when the compost is ready to add back into the soil, anybody in the community who has contributed to it can also take from it and use it to be beneficial. There's other means to get rid of oils.
Rachel was wondering if you could share any thoughts about watering at night versus in the morning when it's the heat of the summer.
Rachel, I've done that. Because I still work. I am not retired. If I could get over to my plot first thing in the morning, like 6 o'clock, I'll tend to water. But if it's a day I'm headed in early and I can't get there, to me, that is the second best choice, is to water later in the evening, as opposed to throughout the 6 hours when the sun is very hot. Mhm.
And then Jessica was wondering, Fatima, if starting a raised bed with new purchased soil, do you have any recommendations for the type of media, like potting soil, potting mix, etc.?
It depends on what you're going to grow there. I have purchased soil from local businesses around the Northern Virginia area to fill my beds. So they have several options. And I've also purchased soil from the big box folks such as Merrifield Gardens. I'm not advertising, I'm just telling you what I've done in the past, and that has worked.
Okay. I think that's probably the end of the questions that haven't already been answered in the chat. So we're probably ready to go on to the next session of your presentation, Fatima.
Thank you, Julie. All right, now let's begin to discuss in this section, how do you plan your garden layout? Okay, first, let's think about growing what you like to eat. I think this is one of the most exciting things to discuss, because you know what you love, basically what you like to eat or what you like to share with others, and how to grow those plants successfully. If you are just starting out, I would recommend that you start small so that you can see positive results and don't feel overwhelmed with the process and then stop out of frustration. So in this section, I'll discuss various layouts to give you some ideas based on the spacing. If you have some experience, you may want to try something new. When I walk around the community garden area where I grow vegetables, I see a variety of structures and setups and designs overall. So they're very common vegetables on this slide that you may consider growing as a new gardener, and veterans have shown success with growing these type of vegetables. And one of the most common for me is the cucumber, the carrots, the green beans. I grow eggplant. I've grown strawberries. So those are the main ones I've grown. I've never grown asparagus, and beets and peppers I also do. And that's why spacing is important, because I love vegetables. How do you make that decision? The vegetable selection you make for what you want to grow, you should consider season, space, sunlight, time of yield, high yield. What are you looking for? Some examples of high yield plants: lots of produce on small footprint, especially if it grows vertically. Think of your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplants, beans, cucumbers. varieties of kale, Swiss chard, and bok choy. Those are my favorites. If you're looking to plant different type of greens in the winter, summer, you need to be aware of which ones thrive at certain times of the year. If you're looking to grow viney crops such as your melon, pumpkins, and winter squash, because they take up a lot of space, you have relatively small output for the amount of space that they require. And they're also heavy fruits, which makes it difficult to grow vertically. A vegetable I planted once, probably years ago, was sweet potatoes. And the company I order from, instead of sending me, I thought I was ordering three, and it only came in a group of 12. So I end up giving some of the plants away and planting some. I thought I planted few enough that I only would got a few sweet potatoes. Unbeknown to me, I got sweet potatoes until the time I was taking down my plot for the fall. They were growing all between my tomato plants, and I couldn't give away enough. So take a minute to read about the plant and what it needs and whether or not you can provide it what it needs. The bottom line is to grow what you love to eat and share with others, but it's all experimental. That's what makes vegetable garden exciting for me, because from year to year, you get different results. Understanding heirloom and hybrid plants. Something else to consider when you are deciding what you like to eat and what you want to grow. You may want to consider knowing the difference between hybrid and heirlooms plants. Hybrid plants are created intentionally by gardeners. It's the crossing between the breeding of two different species to produce a new plant. An example is the Meyer lemon tree and mandarin orange, which can grow in warm climates. Another example, which I grow, is the broccolini, which is a cross between broccoli and Chinese kale. I love it. It's expensive in a garden store, so why buy it there? And I can grow it in my garden. Has long, tender stem, and the taste is really mild. A lot of gardeners find it fun to experiment with hybrid seeds. They also can be saved, but the produce, it can be also unpredictable. Heirlooms and seeds that have been passed down from one generation to another, they're open pollinated, meaning naturally by insects, birds, and wind. One of my favorite heirloom plants to grow are the Cherokee purple tomatoes. I love to cut them and just slice them and eat them, or even put them on toast. They have this smoky taste and a dark purple skin. You can save the seeds to grow the following year, but they must be saved in airtight containers. And how you save the seeds is typically written on the seed package, which we will discuss later. Now that you've decided what you want to grow, let's discuss when's the best time of the year to do so. We have a relatively long growing season in Northern Virginia, but you want to make sure you maximize that time to hopefully get the best results. Remember, right plant, right condition, right place, right time. So this chart is one of your handouts. It shows you the best time of year for planting and harvesting your vegetables. Cool weather plants such as your beets, your carrots, radish, kale, and some warm weather plants such as your tomatoes, peppers, and okra. Plant names followed by asterisk on this document on the chart means that the timelines shown are for planting transplants. This is the back side of that same document. This was sent to you as a part of the handouts, and they may also drop it in the chat. This side of the document provides a year-long calendar of the activities when you should perform throughout the year. It's a great resource for new and experienced gardeners. For example, if an experienced gardener is getting ready to grow something they've never grown before, this chart may help them. Activities such as when to plant cover crops, when to plant transplant, and outdoors and more. So it's a wonderful year-long process that there's always something you can do. On this slide, it also ties into what I meant by there's always something to do as you are planning. So the typical planning schedule for Northern Virginia consists of, let's say, January to February, you plan, April, early May, you prepare. When I plan, I tend to use pencil and paper. I'll show you a couple of designs in the upcoming slides that vary and ways in which you can plan your garden, whether it's in containers or whether it's in hanging planters. There's always a good time to do that. And then I followed a Mother's Day rule, typically plant a warm weather crop later. And I've done that with cucumbers and beans, and I did it successfully last year because it avoided the pest life cycle, and I didn't have a lot of issues with either of those crops. And also, my peppers lasted way into later in the season, like November. And I believe that that's because I planted them later and we now have a longer growing season. Our growing season or our growing hardiness, it's just about the coldness of certain moments, the average temperature we talked about. For zone 8A, for example, the average temperature minimum is 10 to 15 degrees, and the average minimum temperature for zone 7B. It's important that you know where your zone is and what is the best temperature to plant in. Okay, let's go through a couple of fun garden layouts that you may want to consider. I'll show you some trellis designs, raised bed for the gardener on who is asking about raised beds. And then I'll also show you some other option for containers. So now that you've decided what vegetables you want, you can consider the different designs for ingrown or raised beds. This is the fun part, to get out your pencil and paper and just begin. But keep the things we talked about already in mind, such as your spacing and how the vegetable grows. So ask yourself, how much space will it take up? Does it grow on a vine? Is it bushy? Do you plan to have a garden all season or just the summer months or year long? Perhaps you will just use containers this year. For example, some folks in Northern Virginia are snowbirders. Will your children be at home in the summer to help or hinder? So keep life in mind, because this is supposed to be something that's enjoyable and beneficial for you as you make the decision not only of what you want to plant, what the environment should be, but what will your garden layout be? These are examples of trellises, cage, and other support structures if your plant requires it. If you're using support, you need to have them at the start of the garden season, as they need to be in the ground at the same time as your seeds or your transplant so that the roots aren't disturbed. I added my cages for tomatoes a couple of times after I put the transplant in, and it kind of may have broken a limb or two here or there. So now I do them simultaneously, and the tomatoes tend to have a lot of ability to move about, and I could tie the limbs as they grow at various levels. Another example here is a summer garden design, raised radishes, sequential planting, the substituting of lettuce or kale for radish, okra for tomatoes, and other viney plants are examples in this slide. These designs, I've tried something similar to this where I may have planted my peppers or my peas on a trellis to the back of my plot. And eventually I will switch that out to have my cucumbers in that area. And when I plant my greens, if I want them to continue and continue on, I will do some succession planting, which I will also discuss. So on this one, this is another layout. You could design your layouts by computer generated layouts, pencil and paper. You can use whatever you are convenient with. AI generated layouts are also possible. I love the picture top left where it shows friends like containers based on this space. So the next couple of slides, I will go over some tips on how to increase your yield now that you have planned and planted your garden. Opportunities to increase yield. Companion and interplanting systems are those in which two or more crops are grown together for a specific amount of time. A great example of this is very familiar probably to some of you. We consider the Three Sisters, which is planting beans, corn, and squash together. I visited a school once in my daytime job, and I saw on a Indian land school where the students have done exactly this, and it was so great to see. These three plants have a wonderful relationship and a benefit to each other without causing harm. The corn provides structure for the beans. The squash is spiky and keeps the weeds down below. So it's very good for those crops to grow together. All right, let's talk a little bit about companion planting. And that in particular is defined as the art of growing plants next to each other because of their ability to enhance or complement the other's growth or attract beneficial insects or repel insects pests. These relationships are designed to improve resistance to pests, improve growth rigor, or lead to flavor enhancement. This process is rooted in symbiotic relationships between different plants rather than being based on spacing patterns. Row crops are grown together simultaneously with a minimum of one crop is planted in a row. Succession planting is the practice of seeding crops at intervals of 7 to 21 days in order to maintain a consistent supply of harvestable produce throughout the season. Succession planting also involves planting a new crop after harvesting the first crop. If you want greens for an extended period of time, then this is a great method. I have used this method successfully over time. You can also attract beneficial insects, such as lady beetles are among the best, and they tend to be one of the most beneficial insects. Believe it or not, there are about 400 and over 70 species occur in North America. So both the adult, the larva of the ladybug, they consume aphids, they consume immature scale insects, mites, and other soft-bodied insect pests, as well as insect eggs, planted native plants to increase pollination. And it also adds to the aesthetic of the garden by including those type of plants. I tend to plant sunflower. I tend to have marigold around my plants and other things such as rubino, etc. I'll show you a slide today that will capture some of those. So now let's talk about the opportunity to increase yield by attracting these beneficial insects. Open pollinated, which means the flowers are fertilized by bees, moths, birds, bats, and even the wind or rain. The seed that form produce the same plant that year can happen. Some open pollinators are self-pollinators, meaning that structures of the flower allow fertilization before it opens. The opposite would be plants produced through controlled pollination, such as hybrid seeds, which are created intentionally by the cross pollination of two different species. Popular pollination selection, I just told you some of the selections that I've used throughout my garden from a variety of years. They provide a variety of plants for pollination to encourage visitors to your garden that will do just that, increase your yields. During this process, they may brush against flowers, reproductive parts, and unintentionally deposit pollen from plant to plant. You can also add a diverse array of native plants to your garden. It not only adds beauty, it increases your yield. This slide shows some of the common plants that you should consider growing. There are some herbs that play a positive role in this process, such as rosemary and basil. Pollinators love these plants. Bees also love lavender. I think I shared prior that I had a huge lavender plant. If you went out to the garden in the afternoon, you would see bees just humming around the plant. You'll see birds around plants that I sporadically added to improve an attractive area. I also have a milkweed because I love the monarch butterfly. So those are some things you should take into consideration. I've also planted verbena to the back of my plot, and that added a natural border. I tend to have a fence because of deer. So I also added plants that grow tall enough in that area to also lead to some type of barrier and also improve pollination and benefiting my plants. So I think that's great. Zinnia is another one of my favorite. And also by doing this, I can harvest these as cutting flowers to add to my table. So let's talk about the takeaways regarding selection and things you should take into consideration when you're making your selection, the spacing and location, the importance of the time of year, and one way to increase your yield, depending on your space. All right, so now you see Caitlin on camera, so that means we are going to pause for questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Fatima. That was awesome. Two quick questions related to this section. One question was about square foot gardening. Fatima, I'm not sure if you have experience trying the square foot gardening method and if you have any thoughts about whether that's a good practice for newbies to try.
I haven't tried square foot gardening. What I would say, even though I haven't tried it, is just keep those two things in mind: spacing and what you want to plant.
And then a question was, are there any vegetables you would recommend winter sowing in the gallon milk jugs for cool crop planting in the spring?
Spring and or summer, I typically don't plant in containers or for transplants certain plants that can be directly sowed because they do better by being directly sowed. I think one year I tried it with sweet potato and a melon because there are ways you can do your sweet potato in a cup and put a toothpick or something through to start creating the roots. So I've done that. For summer I have done tomatoes, of course, and a variety of peppers. And the other crops for winter, I tend to direct sow. I'm thinking of my greens that I plant, like what I would plant now. I would put the seeds based on the temperature and the area in which the time in which they thrive directly into the ground on my kale and my spinach. And then I would also direct sow the beets, carrots, radish, etc., like that. I don't know if folks tend to transplant or start with their peas inside because I've always been brave and just thrown the seeds in the ground.
That's good. I've also done the same with you as peas, but I have really good luck with doing kale and spinach in the milk jugs before putting them in the bed.
There's a gardener in our community. She comes with about a dozen of milk jugs in which she has done that.
That's great. And then Joseph has a question about beans. He's had difficulty with growing pole beans, gets lots of vines, but few flowers and beans. Do you have any advice or thoughts on that?
Beans in this area can be a challenge depending on the type of bean that you're growing. The variety and the timing of the beans can play a role. I don't amend any soil any particular way to grow beans. It may be a matter also of the amount of sunlight, the amount of water that you're giving the plant. So, Joseph, I would say pay close attention to the type of beans you are growing and the guidance from the vendor as to what it needs to be successful.
Mhm.
I tend to plant my beans now later in the season to avoid the pests that attract bees. There's certain beans I will not grow in my plot because it always fails, but most of the time it's due to pests and disease. For example, I grow red noodles now and they just tend to thrive and the pests don't tend to attack them at all. So Joseph, go back and look and see where you're planting them, how much nutrients they're getting or not getting. Are they getting enough sunlight to thrive? And explore all of those things. And if you are bent on using the same type of seeds, and sometimes you just got to try. Mm-hmm. Yay! Here we are obtaining our seeds, plants, equipment, and supplies. This is our last section for today. And I feel as we progress throughout the presentation, you can get more excited about the possibilities with the things we are discussing. So there are four ways, as I stated, for you to obtain your seeds. the four ways to obtain those seeds. There are direct sow seeds in your garden. There are several vegetable plants such as squash, beans that are best directly sowed. The purchase plant online, grow your own transplants, or you can get transplants from stores and nurture a volunteer. I've nurtured volunteers such as cherry tomatoes. This past summer, I chose not to do it because I had over 7 volunteer tomato plants in my plot, and I do like to grow a variety of different types of plants. So I don't do that. And I have used all four of these methods before. It's all fun. You have to experiment and you have to know what works best for you. All right, let's talk about the package. And Joseph, this is what I was referring to. On Common Package, you will receive information about how to be successful with that particular plant, how deep to plant the seeds, to how shallow. Follow the directions, follow the directions, follow the directions will help your seeds germinate and also avoid them from wasting away. The package will also tell you how long it should take before the seeds germinate and when to expect the harvest time. So I say, be patient, be patient, be patient. Another thing you should consider, you get the package, you may have more seeds than you will ever use in a season. So some things you should consider are seed swapping with other vegetable gardeners. You should consider storing the seeds. I have kept seeds over a couple of years and I still had an equally successful plant and vegetables to harvest. The package you see on here is from 2021. This package is empty, but I kept the package because I love the tomatoes. So I keep my seeds in a container so I can look through to see what have I planted before, what did I really like, what didn't bring me joy, and I know not to purchase those again. So that's another good way. Seeds to direct sow. Let's play in the dirt a little bit. Example of plants that you can grow are the things I've mentioned already. The one I will point out is garlic. I plant my garlic in November typically to harvest the next year around May or June. I should have probably about 12 different garlic to harvest this season that hopefully are thriving under the snow and the amount of rain that we have had this season. Places where you can get your seeds, supermarkets, box hardware stores, local garden shops, mail order seed companies. There are several of those out there. I get the catalog for some of those companies because I may have liked what I received from one company for one type of seed and another company for a different type of seed. And then also it's a personal choice as to what type of seeds you want to purchase. It's whether you want hybrid, heirlooms, organic. I'm not going to tell you, you only need to do this. Your choice, your food, your garden. Have fun. Tips for buying transplants. Pay attention to this, especially if you're a first-time gardener. You may want to obtain transplants. One of the benefits of obtaining transplant is the work is already done for you. You will only want to use the transplants in places where you would not be able to direct sow your seeds. Look for short, stocky plants with uniformity. Avoid tall, spiny plants. What I tend to do, because I have purchased some plants from stores, I tend to look at the bottom of the container it's in to see how the roots are compacted there. I'll look at the leaves on the plant, whether or not the stem is sturdy. So those are some of the things I do when I am purchasing those transplants. There are some pros and cons to growing your own transplants. It brings you personal joy and you get to know what's going into your soil and what type of seeds, fertilizer that you included to create this transplant. Satisfactory. It can also be very costly because you have to have the various containers we talked about earlier, the milk containers, the milk jugs. I have also used eggshell cartons to grow and to make transplants. Keep those things in mind about what you're doing and look at the pros and cons. One of the cons for me that has a great impact on why I don't do it often right now is because it requires a lot of dedicated space. And there's an initial startup course, which you can probably use from time to time. And the commitment can truly become overwhelming if you have other activities, children, a job that is very demanding. So think about it. It's not for all, but if you want to dive into it, you should do so. Let's talk a little bit about the garden equipment. Depending on your space, you can invest in a shed, a huge bucket, or use your garage. Please, please, please do not go out and buy a ton of tools. First, you will probably only use a few, depending on the type of garden and what you're growing. On this slide, you see some popular tubes from my colleagues in this area. At a minimum, you should consider having a bucket or a basket to harvest, a hoe, a rake, a shovel, or what they call the hari, which means dig, tools. You should consider having shears and perhaps a weed knife. There are many opportunities also to borrow tools. So think about if you have a friend who's also gardening, you may want to borrow the tools. One thing also that's important is making sure your tools are sharp because that too can have a negative impact on how you cut and harvest your plants. All right, let's talk a little bit about personal attire. One of the most important things to remember here is sunscreen and hydration. Wear a hat, long sleeve, and pants. Use sunscreen. You may be outside for a longer period of time than you anticipated, and you do not want to reap the negative consequences for that. You may be having fun and lose track of time. And I am stressing this because this has happened to me. And I always keep something in my car now with electrolytes too. And try to stop every hour if I'm going to be out there for a duration of time and drink water, even if I do not feel thirsty. Because once you feel thirsty, you are basically already dehydrated. The other thing you want to take care of are your gloves. I use bright color gloves because I can get into a zone and I'm gardening and I may take my gloves off and rest them down and move on to something else. Then I'm standing there going, where are my gloves? So you may want to consider doing the same thing. Also, remember to lean your tools against a fence, and this will help prevent accidents from happening and making sure they're not getting tangled up together. You might anticipate Other things such as severe reaction to bugs or other plants that may cause you harm. So, a good hygiene habit after being outdoors gardening is to go home and immediately shower and put that clothing aside. I am up to date with my tetanus shot, so I just think that that's important to do also if you are outdoors gardening. And you may want to also have bandages and clean towels nearby just in case something happens. So all of these are important safety tips. I used to be in my garden in shorts and a t-shirt. And now you will never see me out there like that. I put sunscreen on every single day and I wear a hat and long sleeve pants and long sleeve tops that have that wicky kind of fabric that don't make you hot, but it also absorbs the water. That, if you were going to invest in anything, is your personal safety and the attire in which you will wear. Oh, one more thing before I go on is closed toe shoes. Do not go out there in open toe shoes. You may end up injuring yourself. We have online resources. One of my favorite spots is visiting the Between the Rows. It is a phenomenal site and has wonderful information for you that will help you throughout your journey of gardening. So, the main takeaways from this last section today is sharing with you a variety of ways in which you can obtain your plants. I also shared with you what is successful regarding direct sowing plants or creating your own transplants or purchasing them. And the equipment, please don't go to the store and buy out Home Depot or Lowe's or any other store. And most importantly, of everything today is protect yourself, consider your safety. This will help you enjoy what you're doing as opposed to developing a rash and other possible things that would impact your health. That's the end of this presentation. So I'll pause there to see if there are any final questions.
Well, thank you so much, Fatima. It was just a pleasure hearing from you today. There are two final questions that I saw through the chat. There was one comment and a little bit of a discussion in the chat about somebody who's been having difficulty with tomatoes over the past few years. Sounds like this person used to have really good success with tomatoes, but in the past few years that they've been starting to grow really late. They've been getting fewer. They're only coming in September. They usually buy transplants, and somebody else was mentioning that weather has been a challenge for tomatoes. So I'm just wondering if you have anything to comment on. Have you had any trouble with tomatoes over the past few years, and do you have any tips for success for this year for growing tomatoes?
I think this year is going to be very interesting considering our winter season and the amount of moisture we've had, such as the rain and the snow, that also impacts tomatoes. Like, for example, in the summer, when we got an abundance of rain, it can make the tomato plants burst sometimes. One suggestion I do have is when you start to see your tomatoes almost at a point where they're ready to harvest, I've occasionally harvested those and put them on my windowsill. I also want you to consider how you're watering your tomato plants. I've seen hundreds of people water their tomato plants by just spraying. I do not recommend that. I recommend putting the hose or whatever you're using down on the ground and making sure the water is getting to the roots. Make sure you're not overwatering or underwatering. I agree, we've had some challenges this year. And then think about the type of tomatoes you're growing and go back to your soil. It may be a good time to test the soil where you are planting your tomatoes. Have you planted them in the same bed or same spot every single year? The advice I've received is that it's always beneficial, perhaps every 2 years or so, to rotate your plants as to where you're planting them. So think about a couple of those things. And also, if you're buying transplants, remember the tips here for purchasing those transplants.
And then one other question, one of our attendees today was saying that they've been attempting to grow sweet peppers from heirloom seed that they harvested, but haven't had any success. They're wondering if you have any tips to share on growing heirloom sweet peppers from seed.
I haven't grown them from seeds. That's one that I purchased from an online vendor. And
Okay.
that may be one it's better to purchase a seedling.
Okay. There were two questions lingering about soil. So one question about soil for vegetables, Fatima, was whether different plants prefer different soil characteristics. For example, are there plants that prefer
Mhm.
more acidic soil and would prefer more coffee
Yes.
grounds, for example, added to the compost, etc.?
Yes, that's a really good question. And that is correct. Remember, I said the ideal pH for a vegetable garden are in that sweet spot of 6.5, 6 to 7. And if your pH is below that, on either end, below or over that, you most likely won't be successful of planting in that area. Again, another reason to do a soil test. One of my beds in my garden, it's a sandy bed. So I have sand in there, little pieces of pebbles. And in that plot, I grow rosemary, the lavender I talked about, because they don't like sitting in a lot of water. They prefer that drier area where there's good runoff, there's good aeration in the soil. I tend to stick my finger or take one of my garden tools and stick it in the ground to see if that area is compacted, because I'm looking for an area to plant my seeds or my beets, my carrots, my radish. And if it's compact, I will not plant those seeds there. They like a looser soil in order to grow, to expand. You have to provide them with the space even under the soil. Above the soil and under the soil, the temperature of the soil, all of those things play a role. And then also adding compost and adding manure to your garden can be very, very beneficial. Mhm.
And then one other person had a question about soil testing. They have several different garden beds throughout their yard, I guess, and they're curious if they should do individual soil tests for each bed or mix them together. And I'm not sure if they're growing very different things in the beds.
I've done my soil tests. I would take soil from 4 different areas in a bed, but some of my beds have a similar composition. So I may also take some from that bed in the same box. And then also, as you do that, you can put on that paper what is being grown in that particular bed. If your soil is just completely different throughout your garden, you may want to do more than one soil test. The amendment that was recommended for me, it applied to all 4 beds. So
Mhm.
do the physical assessment first and then do the chemical assessment with a soil kit. And I would say that's how I've done it. If you feel there are a variety of things in each one of those different beds, you may want to do a soil test for each one, but otherwise, that's what I've done.
That's great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have for today, Fatima. I just wanted to thank you again for putting together this presentation and sharing it with all of us. And again, for everyone who's here, this is a two-part series.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Julie. And most importantly, thank you to the audience.